Paul was constantly battling false doctrines that undermined the gospel and emphasized Christ over other spiritual intermediaries, right? Um, so he was saying, look, these guys are pulling you away from Christ. We need to focus here, right? So the Gnostians fit this pattern, worshipping eons and angels as emanations between God and man, gaining secret knowledge through mystical visions. You cannot prove these mystical visions, they're entirely subjective. Right. Gnostianity was one of the earliest heresies to rise against the Christian church, and it was known mainly from Irenaeus of Lyon's writings, who was one of its chief early opponents. So not all Gnostians believed exactly the same thing. These people believed whatever, and they would change on the daily, right? But the general outlines of the belief were fairly clear. Now, Gnostians are dualists. They teach that there are two great opposing forces, the good God, the evil God, light versus darkness, knowledge versus ignorance, spirit versus matter. Short version, like within the Manichaeans, there are two equal gods, the good God and the bad God. The bad God attacked the good God and cut off a whole piece of him, making him weak. And these pieces of his soul, his light, fell into matter, into your bodies. And this is why often marriage and procreation was evil, and why abortion is good, because you're dividing, diluting the good God's light, his spirit, into more and more matter, trapping it. And you need to send this all back. So therefore, abortion good, because you're sending more of it back. You're sending these sparks back to heaven. And the good God can become more powerful and finally regain full power and bring balance to the force. Get the idea? This is just one of the mythologies that they tell. Straight up pagan, yeah. So the word Sophia. Sophia, the word in pleroma. This world, the material cosmos, is the result of a primordial error on the part of a supracosmic, supremely divine being, usually called Sophia, the wisdom, or the logos, the word. Right? This being was described as the final emanation of a divine hierarchy, called the pleroma, or the fullness, right? At the head of which resided the supreme God, the one beyond being, Allah, in other words. Right? Since the world is material and imperfect, they denied that God had made it. How can the perfect produce the imperfect is one of their questions. So how can the infinite produce the finite? And how can the spiritual produce the material? These are questions they asked. These were supposedly their polemic against Christian belief, right? The perfect will only produce the perfect. The immaterial will only produce the immaterial. So one solution was to invent 30 eons. God made the first eon. He emanated the first eon. Albert, right? If Albert's a Gnostic, Cetos, thank you very much for the support. So if Albert is the mindless eon that just emanates like a little ant queen that just pops out ants, God made the first eon. The first eon made the second eon made the third, and the third made the fourth to the 30th eon, and the 30th eon made the world. Okay? So they're trying to explain how you got from immaterial to material by this process, right? So why didn't they, to make God more powerful, why didn't they join off themselves to make God more powerful? That's a very good question, Marion. That's actually why 30. Well, we'll get to that, Mr. Rock. So Gnostians told initiates this was the true inward spiritual meaning of the statement that Jesus was 30 years old when he began to preach, because 30 eons. Now, anti-Gnostian writers pointed out that this didn't help at all. Each eon must be either finite or infinite. It must be either spiritual or it must be material. If any eon is finite or material, then at some point you have an infinite spiritual being, the previous eon, that creates a finite material being. So that still doesn't answer the question of how you get from immaterial perfect to material imperfect. It still doesn't explain. It just pushes it back 30 times. So when they hit 30, it's time to go. Actually, do you remember there's a science fiction movie that actually says that once you hit the age of 30, you die. It's I don't know if it's Soylent Green or one of the other ones, but there's like one of these famous 1970s science fiction movies where you lived until 30 and then you killed. So yeah, think about the symbolism there, right? Now, the Gnostics, Logan's Run, that's it. Bay State Observer, well done. So what you have is the Gnostians didn't solve the problem. This is the same problem. They were left with the same problem that their particular theory was meant to solve, which just shows how, yeah. Logan's Run, yes. Interesting attempted parallel with Jesus, but I was under the impression actually he started his ministry in his 20s, not 30. I mean, everyone says 30, so yeah. So Gnostianity, it's misguided, leads to evil, so it is logically incoherent. It just pushes the problem of the infinite to finite creation back one step, 30 steps in this case, without actually resolving it. And the Christian view that God created the world avoids all of these logical contradictions. It avoids having to create an insane mythology, which is what atheism does, like for instance with the multiverse, that it just creates insane mythologies because it doesn't want to admit one God, so it makes a multiplicity of universes that have never been proven, cannot be proven. If each eon is created by the one before it, and at least one eon must be material finite, then each subsequent eon is logically further removed from the original infinite spiritual source. They're into an infinite regress. Exactly, that's a logical fallacy, right? Logical error. So as the eons propagate from God, then purity and perfection must give way to finitude and imperfection. So then you've got this watering down of the eons. As you go from 1 to 30, they become less and less pure. But here they were originally speaking of this purity that remains, right? So logically speaking, then you have to have this degradation of the quality of the spirit, and eventually it becomes matter and corrupt. So this relates to the broader Gnostian view that the material world is inherently corrupt or impure, being furthest from the divine source. The further you are from the pleroma and the divine source, the more corrupt you are. This still does not solve the logical problem of how that degradation from infinite to finite occurs in the first place. Still no answer. At some point, there must be an imperfection arising from perfection. Finitude arising from infinity. That answers the question is not answered. So the Christian view is that God created a good world and evil arose from the imperfect free choice of humans. This makes more logical sense. God made a world that was good. Humans introduced error from free choice. We do not have perfect knowledge and we made bad choices. That sounds like the total depravity from Calvinism. Yes, we'll be getting to that. So Gnostians are misguided in positing inherent evil in the material realm itself. All right, so it says see notes. So let me see if I have anything in the notes that is relevant here. So, yeah, actually, I'll bring these notes up. So I've got some notes I'll share. So theologically, Gnostianism leads to evil in several ways. It denies the goodness of the physical world. So Gnostians believe the material world is evil and illusory. It's created by a lesser, ignorant deity. So this leads to a denigration of the human body, of sexuality and physical pleasures. But God created the physical world